The classroom was full when Deho arrived. Every seat was taken, and several instructors stood along the walls watching. Word had spread about today's presentations. Everyone wanted to see what the cadets would bring. Deho found a seat in the back row and placed the wooden box on the floor beside him. His hands were sweating. He wiped them on his uniform and tried to breathe normally. Around him, other cadets were examining their objects. Borum had a large glass case containing a fang the size of Deho's forearm. Hyaron held a blade that caught the light and threw rainbow colors across the wall. Instructor Vexthar entered the room and the noise died immediately. He walked to his platform and looked at the assembled cadets with his 4 eyes. Today you will show me what your species truly is. You will prove to me that you understand what it means to be a predator. He gestured to Borum. We will begin with the Thexan. Borum stood and carried his glass case to the platform. He placed it carefully on the desk and turned to face the class. This fang belonged to my grandfather's grandfather. He lived for 90 years and fought in 17 ritual combats. He never lost. When he died, his fangs were preserved to honor his strength. Borum opened the case. The fang inside was yellow with age, but still sharp. Each combat was single opponent. No weapons except our natural ones. He killed each opponent himself. This fang represents Thexan superiority in direct combat. Vexthar nodded approvingly. A worthy trophy. The Thexan understanding of individual strength is admirable. Next, one by one, cadets brought their objects forward. A Horvathi presented a claw from a pack leader who had defended his territory for 20 years. A Kralik showed a preserved scale from the first of their species to achieve spaceflight, who had killed 30 opponents in arena combat. Hyaron presented her blade and spoke of her hive's conquest of 3 colonies, 40,000 enemies defeated over 2 generations. Each presentation was met with nods and quiet approval from Vexthar. Each object represented strength, dominance, individual or small group achievement. The pattern was clear. These were species that hunted, that fought, that won. They were proud of their victories. Cadet Deho, Vexthar said. His voice was cold. Let us see what humanity has brought. Deho stood and picked up the wooden box. It felt heavier than before. Every eye in the room followed him as he walked down the steps to the platform. He could feel their judgment. The human. The weak one. The prey animal pretending to be a predator. He placed the box on the desk next to all the other trophies. Compared to the fang and the blade and the claw, it looked small and simple, just an old wooden box. This, Deho said quietly, contains a human skull. He opened the box and carefully removed the skull. The bone was pale in the classroom lights. The empty eye socket stared at nothing. Deho held it gently and placed it on the desk. Vexthar leaned forward. It is smaller than my trophy. What makes this special? This skull belonged to a human soldier. We don't know his name. We don't know where he was born or who his family was. He died 80 years ago in a place called Europe. Deho paused. He was one of approximately 75 million humans who died in a single conflict. The room was very quiet. 75 million, Deho repeated. We call it the Second World War. It lasted 6 years. Borum made a noise like a hiss. That's impossible. No war could kill that many. It did. And it wasn't even our bloodiest century. Deho pulled the data chip from his pocket and loaded it into the classroom's display system. Numbers appeared on the wall behind him. Lists of wars. Lists of deaths. Human history is full of conflicts. Small ones. Large ones. Wars over territory, over resources, over ideas we couldn't see or touch. The numbers scrolled slowly. The cadets watched in silence. 75 million for World War II. 20 million for World War I, 40 million for the Mongol conquests, 15 million for the Taiping Rebellion. The numbers kept coming. You brought trophies from your greatest warriors, Deho said. Warriors who killed dozens or hundreds in combat. Individual achievement. Personal strength. That's honorable. That's impressive. He gestured at the skull. This soldier wasn't special. He wasn't a great warrior. He was just one of millions, and millions like him died in ways you can't imagine. Deho pulled up images. Cities destroyed by bombs, trenches filled with bodies, battlefields that looked like the surface of dead planets. We didn't just fight with claws or fangs. We created weapons specifically to kill more efficiently. Guns, bombs, poison gas. We turned murder into mathematics. We calculated how to kill the most people in the shortest time. Hyaron stood up. Why? What did you fight over? Everything. Land, resources, religion, political systems, pride. Daiho changed the display to show a mushroom cloud rising over a city. This weapon destroyed an entire city in seconds. 70,000 people dead instantly. We used it twice in 1 week. Vexithar's claws scraped against his desk. This is not predator behavior. This is madness. You killed your own species over nothing. Not nothing, ideas. We killed each other over ideas. Daiho pulled up the final number. Total estimated deaths from human warfare. 1,100,000,000. Over our recorded history, we have killed at least this many of ourselves. Maybe more. We don't have good records for all our wars. The number hung on the wall. Nobody spoke. Daiho could see some cadets counting on their claws or tentacles, trying to understand how large that number really was. Your species should be extinct, Hyarin said quietly. We almost were. Several times. We came very close to destroying ourselves completely. Daiho looked at the skull on the desk. But we didn't. We learned. Eventually. We built civilization specifically to stop ourselves from killing each other. It took thousands of years, but we learned. What does this prove? Vexthar demanded. That humans are violent? That you kill each other? This doesn't make you predators. This makes you destructive prey. Daiho met the instructor's 4 eyes. You asked for an object that represents our predator heritage. You wanted to see what makes humanity dangerous. This is it. We're not the strongest species. We're not the fastest. We don't have natural weapons. But we are very, very good at killing. We practiced on ourselves for 10,000 years. He gestured at the other trophies on the desk. Borum's grandfather killed 17 opponents over 90 years. That's impressive. Hyarin's hive defeated 40,000 enemies over 2 generations. That's formidable. But in 6 years, humans killed 75 million humans. In 1 century, we killed over 200 million of ourselves. And we did it with tools and weapons we invented for that specific purpose. Daiho picked up the skull again. You want to know what makes humans predators? It's not that we hunt other species. It's that we hunted ourselves. We turned warfare into science. We got so good at killing each other that we nearly ended our own species several times. And then we looked at what we had done and we chose to stop. Mostly. You chose to stop because you were weak, Vexthar said. Because you feared your own destruction. We stopped because we got smart. Because we realized that a species that can kill 1 billion of itself needs rules, needs control, needs to point that capability at something other than itself. Daiho placed the skull back in its box. We still have all those weapons. We still have all that knowledge. We just chose not to use it on ourselves anymore. He closed the box and looked around the room. Every species here brought trophies of the hunts they won. I brought evidence of the hunt we perfected. The hunt for ourselves. That's what makes humans predators. We learned to kill so efficiently that we had to invent civilization to survive it. Daiho walked back to his seat. Behind him, the number still glowed on the wall. 1,100,000,000. The room remained silent. Even Vexithar had nothing to say. Finally, an older instructor standing against the wall spoke up. He was human, wearing a commander's insignia. Daiho recognized him from briefing documents. Commander Tajin, Senior Coalition Officer. Instructor Vexthar, Tajin said calmly. I think Cadet Daiho has adequately demonstrated humanity's predator credentials. The question is not whether humans can kill. It's whether we choose to. That choice is what makes us useful to the Coalition. Vexthar's claws scraped against his desk again. His 4 eyes were locked on Daiho. Class dismissed. The cadets filed out quietly. Nobody looked at Daiho as they passed. He remained in his seat waiting for the room to empty. When it was just him and Vexthar left, the instructor finally spoke. You think this proves something? You think numbers matter? I think understanding matters, Daiho said. You asked what we are. I showed you. You showed me that humans are barely controlled chaos. That you survived your own violence through luck. Maybe. But we did survive. And we learned from it. Vexthar was silent for a long moment. Then he stood and walked out of the classroom, leaving the skull sitting on his desk next to all the other trophies. Daiho sat alone in the empty room, looking at that small human skull surrounded by fangs and claws and scales. Somehow it seemed to fit. The observation deck of the Galactic Council station offered a view that never failed to take Captain Jiho's breath away. Stars stretched endlessly in every direction, and ships from 100 different worlds moved through the darkness like schools of luminescent fish. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching a Velrosian transport vessel prepare for departure. Somewhere inside that ship were 12 human children, and the weight of their safety pressed heavily on his shoulders. Dr. Hyerin joined him at the window, her reflection appearing in the reinforced glass beside his own. She carried a datapad clutched against her chest, and her eyes sparkled with excitement that Jiho couldn't quite share. "The children are settled in," she said. Minho was asking questions about everything. Salman made friends with the Velrosian attendants already. Doyen organized the other kids into groups for the educational activities. She laughed softly. "They're so excited, Jiho. This is history happening right now." Jiho nodded slowly. 20 years ago, humanity had been alone in the universe, believing themselves unique. Then the Galactic Council had arrived and everything changed. Suddenly, Earth was a backwater planet, and humans were the newcomers in a community thousands of years old. The other species had been polite mostly. They treated humans the way adults might treat enthusiastic children at a formal dinner party, with patience and thinly veiled condescension. "I still think we should have sent more security," Jiho said quietly. Hyerin shook her head. The council was very clear. Extra security would imply distrust. The Velrosians have hosted 300 cultural exchanges over the past century. Not a single incident. Their safety record is perfect. There's a first time for everything. You worry too much. Hyerin placed a hand on his arm. "This is good for humanity. We need to show we can trust our galactic neighbors. We need to let go of our paranoia and embrace cooperation. These children are ambassadors for our entire species." Jiho thought about that word. Ambassadors. Minho was 8 years old. His father was a senator who had personally asked Jiho to watch over his son. The boy had gaps in his teeth and collected pictures of alien worlds. Salman was 9 with dreams of exploring uncharted systems. Doyen was the oldest at 10, already showing signs of becoming a natural leader. They were children, not diplomats. But the galaxy didn't seem to understand the difference. The transport vessel began to move, pulling away from the station with elegant precision. Thrusters fired in brief bursts of blue light. Jiho watched until it disappeared into faster-than-light travel, leaving nothing behind but a faint distortion in space. "They'll be fine," Hyerin said firmly, as if saying it would make it true. 2 days passed normally. Jiho received scheduled updates from the transport vessel. The children were enjoying themselves. They'd tried Velrosian food and made video calls home to their families. Minho sent a message to his father describing the stars from the observation room. Salman recorded a dozen questions for Hyerin about Velrosian culture. Everything seemed perfect. On the 3rd day, the scheduled update didn't arrive. Jiho was in a council meeting when his communicator buzzed with an urgent message. He excused himself and stepped into the corridor, where he read the brief text with growing coldness in his chest. "Communication lost with transport vessel. Last known position recorded. Attempting to re-establish contact." He returned to the meeting room where Ambassador Quillnath was discussing trade agreements with representatives from 6 other species. The Velrosian ambassador was a towering reptilian creature with golden eyes and scales that shimmered under the lights. When Jiho interrupted to explain the situation, Quillnath tilted his head with what might have been concern. "Communication failures happen occasionally," Quillnath said in his measured voice. "Space is vast and sometimes signals are disrupted. I'm certain there's a reasonable explanation." "How long until we investigate?" Jiho asked. "Standard protocol requires 48 hours before launching a search operation. We must not overreact to technical difficulties. 48 hours. 2 full days." Jiho felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Those are human children on that vessel." "Indeed, and I understand your concern," Quillnath replied. "But rushing to conclusions helps no one. The Velrosian Space Authority is already analyzing the situation. We should allow them to complete their assessment." Jiho looked around the room at the assembled aliens. Some watched him with curiosity. Others had already returned to their previous discussions. To them, this was a minor inconvenience. A footnote in their day, none of them seemed to grasp the urgency that was building inside him, like a pressurized container about to explode. He left the meeting and went directly to the human delegation offices. Hyerin was already there, pacing back and forth while speaking rapidly into her communicator. When she saw Jiho, her expression confirmed his worst fears. "Still no contact," she said. I've been trying to reach the vessel directly, but there's nothing. Not even automated systems are responding. What does that mean? It means either every system failed simultaneously, which is nearly impossible, or... She didn't finish the sentence. Jiho activated the emergency communication array and sent a priority message to Earth. He explained the situation in clear, simple terms. 12 children. Communication lost. Galactic Council recommending patience. He requested immediate authorization to take independent action if necessary. The response came back within an hour, which was remarkably fast considering the distance. Earth Command authorized any measures necessary to ensure the children's safety. They were mobilizing resources but needed time. In the meantime, Jiho was given full authority to act as he saw fit. 48 hours passed. The Galactic Council convened a committee to discuss the missing transport vessel. They formed subcommittees. They debated jurisdiction and proper procedures. They discussed which species had authority to conduct searches in different regions of space. Every hour, Jiho felt his patience wearing thinner. Then the message arrived. It came through every communication channel simultaneously, impossible to ignore or block. The screen showed 12 human children sitting on the floor of what looked like a cargo hold. They were scared but appeared unharmed. Standing behind them were creatures Jiho had never seen before. Insectoid beings with multiple arms and chitinous armor that gleamed under harsh lights. One of the creatures spoke in translated Galactic Common. I am Thexval of the Kresh Collective. We hold these human offspring. Our demands are simple. The Galactic Council will withdraw all forces from the Outer Rim territories. You will recognize Kresh sovereignty over 14 systems. You will deliver 500 million galactic credits to coordinates we will provide. You have 7 standard days. Refuse and the offspring will suffer the consequences. The transmission ended. For a moment, the entire council station seemed to hold its breath. Then the emergency sessions began. Representatives rushed to meeting halls. Ambassadors contacted their homeworlds. The machinery of galactic bureaucracy lurched into motion with all the speed of a glacier. Jiho stood in the human delegation office, watching the recorded message play again. Minyo sat in the front row of children trying to be brave. Somin had tears on her cheeks. Doyen had his arm around a younger child, comforting them even while clearly terrified himself. Yiren stood beside Jiho, her earlier optimism shattered. What do we do? We get them back, Jiho said quietly. His voice was calm, but something fundamental had shifted inside him. He'd spent 2 years learning to work within the Galactic Council's systems. He'd been patient and diplomatic. He'd followed procedures and respected protocols. That ended now. The Council will negotiate, Yiren said. That's standard procedure for hostage situations. They have experience with this. How much experience? She checked her datapad, scrolling through files. 17 similar incidents over the past 2 centuries. Average resolution time is 6 to 8 weeks. Average casualty rate among hostages is 12%. 12%. Jiho did the math instantly. 12 children. 12% casualties meant 1 or 2 dead children was considered acceptable. The Galactic Council would negotiate slowly, carefully weighing political considerations against individual lives. They would take their time because that's what wisdom and experience taught them to do. They would sacrifice Minho or Somin or Doyen because the mathematics of galactic politics demanded it, Captain. Jiho walked to the communication console and began typing. He wasn't contacting the Galactic Council. He was sending messages to Earth, to the Mars colonies, to the Luna bases and the orbital stations. He was activating networks and calling in favors and triggering emergency protocols that humanity had hoped never to use. What are you doing? Yiren asked. Reminding the galaxy, Jiho said quietly, that humans don't negotiate when our children are threatened. The Galactic Council chamber was a massive oval room with seats arranged in ascending circles, allowing every species to see the central floor where speakers addressed the assembly. Today the chamber was packed. Representatives from 70 different worlds had gathered for the emergency session, their various forms creating a bizarre gallery of galactic diversity. Some breathed methane and sat in sealed environments. Others floated in zero-gravity fields. A few were so large they appeared only as holographic projections scaled down to manageable sizes. Captain Jiho sat in the human delegation box with Yiren beside him and 2 other human representatives from the Mars colonies. Below them, Ambassador Quillnath stood at the central podium. speaking in his calm, measured voice that seemed designed to drain urgency from any situation. "The Kresh Collective's demands are not unprecedented," Quillnath explained, gesturing with one clawed hand. "Throughout galactic history, fringe groups have attempted similar actions. Our response must be measured and careful. Rash action will only endanger the hostages further." A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. Jiho watched dozens of species nod their various heads or equivalent body parts. They'd all seen this before. To them, this was routine. "What do you propose?" asked a representative from the Thorian Unity, a gaseous being whose voice resonated through speakers. "Standard negotiation protocol," Quillnath replied. "We begin discussions with the Kresh leadership. We establish communication channels and build rapport. We make small concessions over time, gradually moving toward a resolution that preserves galactic stability. We've refined this process over thousands of years. It works. How long?" Jiho spoke from his seat, his voice cutting through the diplomatic murmuring. Quillnath turned to look up at the human delegation box. "Captain Jiho, I understand your concern, but interruptions during formal address are not—" "How long will this take?" Jiho repeated, standing now. "Specific numbers. How many days, weeks, or months?" Quillnath's golden eyes blinked slowly. "These matters cannot be rushed. Based on previous incidents of similar complexity, I would estimate 6 to 8 weeks for a satisfactory resolution." 8 weeks. Jiho felt something tighten in his chest. "The Kresh gave us 7 days. Their deadline is a negotiating tactic," Quillnath explained patiently, as if speaking to a child who didn't understand adult matters. "They don't expect us to meet it. The deadline will pass, we'll continue negotiations, and eventually we'll reach an agreement. This is how these situations resolve themselves." "And the hostages?" Jiho asked. "What happens to them during these 8 weeks?" "The Kresh will keep them alive. Dead hostages have no value." Quillnath paused. "There may be some casualties, of course. That's unavoidable in situations like these. But our models suggest we can keep losses below 15% if we follow proper protocol." 15%. The number hung in the air like poison gas. Jiho did the math again. 12 children. 15% meant 1 or 2 dead. Maybe Minho, who collected pictures of alien worlds. Maybe Soman, who wanted to be an explorer. Maybe Doyun, who took care of the younger children even when he was terrified himself. The galaxy called that acceptable losses. Hyeron put a hand on Jiho's arm, a silent plea for restraint. Around the chamber, other representatives were already moving on to discuss the logistics of negotiation. Who would lead the talks? What initial concessions could they offer? How would they manage the political implications of Kresh demands? Not once did anyone mention the children by name. Not once did anyone suggest that 8 weeks might be too long. They talked about territory disputes and economic impacts and historical precedents. They debated the fine points of interstellar law and discussed which committees should be formed to oversee the negotiation process. 3 hours into the session, a Velkan representative proposed forming a subcommittee to study the Kresh Collective's political motivations. The motion passed with 62 votes in favor. Jiho felt something break inside him. It wasn't a dramatic shattering, more like a cable under too much tension finally snapping. He'd spent 2 years learning to respect the Council's procedures. He'd studied their history and admired their ability to maintain peace across thousands of worlds. But now he understood the price of that peace. It was paid by people like Minho and Soman and Doyun, people whose lives were reduced to percentages and acceptable losses. He stood and walked toward the exit. Hyeron followed, along with the other human representatives. "Captain Jiho," Quillnath called out. "We haven't finished the session." "Where are you going?" Jiho turned back, looking down at the Velrosian ambassador and the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. "We're done here. The Council requires all affected parties to participate in the resolution process. The Council," Jiho interrupted, "can continue whatever process it wants. Humanity won't be participating." A shocked silence fell over the chamber. In 4,000 years of Galactic Council history, no species had walked out of an emergency session involving their own citizens. "This is highly irregular," Quillnath said, his scales rippling with what might have been confusion or anger. "You can't simply—" "Emergency Protocol Omega," Jiho stated clearly. "Humanity is invoking its right to independent action in matters of immediate threat to human life. It's in our membership agreement. Article 17, Section 4. Another representative, this one from the Nexian Confederacy, spoke up. That protocol hasn't been invoked in 400 years. It's meant for existential threats to your species, not for isolated hostage situations. 12 of our children are hostages, Jiho said quietly. That's existential enough for us. He walked out of the chamber with the entire human delegation behind him. The massive doors closed behind them, muffling the sudden outbreak of argument and debate that erupted in their wake. In the corridor outside, Hyeron grabbed Jiho's arm. What are you doing? We need the council's support. We can't rescue those children alone. Can't we? Jiho pulled up his communicator and showed her the screen. Earth responded 6 hours ago. The United Earth Fleet is mobilizing. 67 warships are being prepared for deployment. Special operations teams from 7 nations are already en route to forward staging areas. We have intelligence assets scanning every comm channel in 3 sectors. Civilian vessels are being organized into search patterns. Hyeron stared at the information scrolling across the screen, her face going pale. This is military action. Do you understand what you're authorizing? This could start a war. The creche started this when they took our children, Jiho replied. We're just finishing it. The council will never approve. I don't need their approval. Jiho looked at her steadily. Hyeron, I respect the council. I understand they've maintained peace for millennia. But their peace requires sacrifices, and I will not sacrifice those children. Not Minho, not Somin, not any of them. If the galaxy wants to punish humanity for that, so be it. Over the next 12 hours, the Galactic Council sent increasingly urgent messages to the human delegation. They demanded explanations. They threatened sanctions. They called emergency votes to revoke humanity's right to independent action. They tried everything in their diplomatic arsenal to bring the humans back under control. Every message went unanswered. Instead, human ships began appearing throughout the sector. They moved with purpose and speed that shocked the other species. The galaxy was used to careful, measured responses. Fleets took weeks to organize. Military operations required months of planning. But humanity was different. Within a day of the hostage situation, human warships were already positioning themselves along likely routes the creche might have taken. The speed of the response sent ripples of concern through the galactic community. Some species worried about human aggression. Others were simply confused. How could the humans mobilize so quickly? Where was the careful planning and committee oversight? They didn't understand that humanity operated on a different timescale when children were involved. The galaxy had millennia to perfect patience. Humanity had something the older species had forgotten: the bone-deep genetic imperative to protect their young at any cost. Dr. Hyeron took charge of the intelligence operation. Despite her concerns about military action, she threw herself into the work of finding the children. She analyzed the hostage video frame by frame, looking for any clues about the location. She consulted with xenobiology experts about the creche physiology. She cross-referenced every piece of data they had about creche movements in the outer rim. 3 days after the children were taken, she found something. On the exoskeleton of one creche guard in the video, there were microscopic pollen particles. The pollen came from a plant species that only grew on 3 worlds in the entire galaxy. All 3 were in the Hadros cluster, deep in the outer rim territories. Lieutenant Jiwan, a navigation specialist, took that information and performed an analysis of creche ship capabilities. She calculated fuel efficiency, travel times, and likely destinations. She narrowed the possible locations to a single system within the Hadros cluster. When she presented her findings to Captain Jiho, her hands were shaking slightly. It's a mining station, she explained. Abandoned by the Galactic Council 15 years ago after the mineral deposits were exhausted. Perfect place for the creche to hide. Remote off the main trade routes with enough infrastructure to support several hundred people. Jiho studied the data. How confident are you? 85%, Jiwan replied. It's the best match for all the variables. Then that's where we're going. Jiho activated his communicator and sent a single message to the fleet. Target acquired. Prepare for assault operations. The Galactic Council intercepted the communication and immediately sent protests. They demanded humanity stand down. They called for dialogue. They warned about the dangers of military action in disputed territories. Ambassador Quillnath personally contacted Jiho with a final plea for reason. Captain, I understand your emotional response, Quillnath said, his image appearing on the communication screen. But you must think rationally. Military action will escalate this situation. You'll be violating council law, entering restricted space, and potentially starting a conflict that could spread across multiple systems. Is that really worth the risk? Jiho looked at the Velrosian ambassador for a long moment. Then he said simply, "Yes." He ended the transmission and turned to his assembled officers. Commander Tajin stood ready with his special operations team. Lieutenant Jiwan had plotted the fastest route to the Hadros cluster. Sergeant Kyung Min had hacking equipment prepared to breach the mining station systems. They were ready. They'd been ready since the moment the children were taken. 7 days, Jiho said quietly. The creche gave us 7 days. We're going to need 3. The human fleet departed the council station without permission, without filing flight plans, without any of the diplomatic niceties the galaxy expected. When a Velrosian patrol tried to stop them, Commander Tajin sent a brief message. Move or be moved. The Velrosians moved. Behind them, the Galactic Council erupted into chaos, but Captain Jiho didn't look back. His eyes were fixed on the Hadros cluster and the 12 children waiting there, who trusted that humanity would come for them. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you threatened a human's cubs. The human fleet moved through space like an arrow shot from a bow, fast, direct, and unstoppable. Captain Jiho stood on the bridge of the flagship, the Earth vessel Indomitable, watching tactical displays show the positions of 67 warships moving in perfect coordination. They'd been traveling for 36 hours and every minute felt like an eternity. Commander Taejun entered the bridge, still wearing his combat armor from a training exercise. He was a compact man with scars on his hands and a reputation for never leaving anyone behind. He'd conducted 80 successful hostage rescue operations in his career, and his success rate was perfect. Not a single hostage had died under his command. Status report, Jiho said without looking away from the displays. My team is ready, Taejun replied. 8 operators fully equipped. We've run the approach simulations 20 times. We can breach the station in 4 locations, simultaneously, and reach the holding area within 6 minutes. 6 minutes is a long time when people are shooting. That's why we won't let them shoot. Taejin pulled up a holographic display showing the mining station's layout. Sergeant Kyungmin will hack their systems first. Cut power to key sections, lock down their armory, disable their communications. By the time they realize we're inside, we'll already have the children. Lieutenant Jiwan approached from the navigation station. She was young for her rank, but her ability to plot faster than light jumps was legendary. Some people joked she could feel the currents of space-time itself. We'll arrive at the Hadros cluster in 18 hours, she reported. I've plotted our approach to avoid detection until the last possible moment. We'll come in from behind the local star using its radiation to mask our signatures. Good work, Jiho said. He pulled up the intelligence files on his personal display, reading through them for perhaps the 100th time. The Creche Collective was relatively new to galactic politics, having emerged from the Outer Rim only 50 years ago. They were insectoid with chitinous armor and multiple limbs that gave them advantages in zero-gravity combat. Their culture valued collective action over individual initiative, which made them predictable in some ways and unpredictable in others. What concerned Jiho most was their psychology. The Creche didn't value individual life the way humans did. To them, the colony mattered more than any single member. They might not understand that threatening human children would provoke such an extreme response. They might be expecting the slow, careful negotiations the Galactic Council favored. They were going to be very surprised. Dr. Hyerin worked in the intelligence section, coordinating with experts across the human fleet. She'd set up communication links with xenobiologists, military analysts, and former hostage negotiators. Every piece of information about the Creche was being gathered and analyzed. She barely slept, surviving on stimulants and determination. When Jiho visited her station, she looked up with red-rimmed eyes. I've been studying the hostage video, she said. The children look scared but not mistreated. That's good. The Creche need them alive and healthy for their demands to have weight. They'll feed them, give them water, keep them safe, at least until the deadline passes. We'll be there before the deadline, Jiho assured her. What if you're wrong? Aaron asked quietly. What if this mining station is empty? What if the children are somewhere else? What if this military action makes the Creche kill the hostages? Jiho had considered all these possibilities. Every decision involved risk. But doing nothing, waiting for the Galactic Council's slow diplomatic process guaranteed casualties. The galaxy's own statistics showed that 12% average casualty rate meant dead children. Chiho refused to accept that. If we're wrong, he said, we'll keep looking. We won't stop until we find them. The Council is threatening serious sanctions, Heron said. They're calling this an illegal military action. Some species are talking about expelling humanity from the galactic community entirely. Let them talk. Chiho, we need the Council. We need access to their trade networks, their technology, their knowledge. If we're cast out, then we're cast out, Chiho interrupted. But those children come home alive. That's non-negotiable. Hiren stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly and returned to her work. Chiho knew she disagreed with his methods, but she understood his motivation. Every human in the fleet did. They'd all seen the video of frightened children surrounded by alien captors. They'd all felt the same primal rage and fear. The Galactic Council might call it an emotional overreaction. Humans called it being human. The fleet continued toward the Hadros cluster. Along the way, they encountered other ships. A Nexian cargo vessel detected them and transmitted a warning to stay out of Council-restricted space. The humans ignored it. A Thorian patrol requested identification and flight authorization. The humans ignored that too. A Velrosian military frigate actually attempted to intercept them, moving to block their path. Commander Taijun handled that situation personally. He opened a communication channel to the Velrosian ship and spoke in calm, clear words. We are proceeding to rescue human citizens. Stand aside. The Velrosian commander responded with threats about council law and proper procedures. Taijun listened patiently, then repeated, Stand aside. You have no authority in this sector. You will stop your fleet immediately or face the consequences. Taijun's expression didn't change. Our children are waiting. You can try to stop us, but you won't succeed. You'll only delay us and possibly get your crew killed. So I'll say this one more time. Stand aside. Something in his voice must have communicated the absolute seriousness of his intent. The Velrosian frigate maintained its position for another 30 seconds, then slowly moved out of the fleet's path. The humans passed without firing a shot. Word spread quickly through the galactic communication networks. Humanity was moving through space with military force, ignoring all diplomatic protocols, refusing to acknowledge any authority except their own. Some species were outraged. Others were terrified. A few were quietly impressed. In the Galactic Council chamber, Ambassador Quilnath convened another emergency session. The humans have gone rogue, he announced. They're violating treaties, entering restricted space, and threatening military action. We must respond decisively to this challenge to Council authority. But when he called for a vote on sanctions against humanity, something unexpected happened. Several younger species abstained. The Corvin delegation, representing a species that had joined the Council only a century ago, actually voted against sanctions. When questioned, the Corvin representative gave a simple explanation. We have children too. We understand why the humans act this way. The vote failed to pass. The Council was paralyzed, unable to agree on how to respond to humanity's unprecedented actions. Meanwhile, the human fleet approached the Hadros cluster. Lieutenant Jiwan's navigation proved flawless. They emerged from faster-than-light travel behind the local star exactly as planned. Sensors swept the system, searching for the abandoned mining station. Target acquired, the sensor officer announced. Mining station designated Hadros 7, reading multiple life signs. Power signatures consistent with occupation. How many creche? Chiho asked. Scanning now. Approximately 800 life forms. Difficult to get exact count through the station's shielding. Wait, I'm detecting human biosigns as well. 12 of them. All showing normal vital signs. The bridge went silent. 12 human biosigns. The children were there. They'd found them. Commander Taijun immediately began final preparations. His assault team gathered in the drop bay, checking equipment and running through their plans one last time. They wore black armor designed to absorb energy weapons and deflect kinetic rounds. Each carried weapons optimized for close-quarters combat in enclosed spaces. They had medical nanites ready to treat injuries instantly. They had breaching charges, flashbang grenades, and hacking tools. Sergeant Kyungmin prepared her electronic warfare equipment. Her job was to breach the station's computer systems and give the assault team every possible advantage. She'd already mapped the station's network architecture from passive scans. Now she just needed to get close enough to inject her hacking programs directly into their systems. "We go in fast and hard," Tajan told his team. "Rules of engagement are simple. Neutralize armed threats, protect the children, minimize casualties. These Kresh are criminals, but they're still living beings. We don't kill unless we have to." "Understood?" 8 voices responded in unison. "Understood, sir." The fleet moved into position around the mining station. The Kresh detected them almost immediately, and frantic communications started pouring from the station. HFY himself appeared on the main communication channel, his insectoid features sharp with anger. "You violate Council protocols," he transmitted. "Turn back or the hostages will suffer." Captain Jiho didn't respond to HFY. Instead, he gave a single order: execute. 4 assault shuttles launched from the Indomitable and 3 other ships. They accelerated toward the mining station, moving too fast for the Kresh to target effectively. The station's old defensive systems tried to lock onto them, but Sergeant Kyungmin was already inside their network, feeding false data and creating phantom targets. The shuttles hit the station's hull at precisely calculated points. Shaped charges detonated, cutting through metal and creating entry points. Before the echoes faded, Commander Tajan and his team were inside, moving through corridors with practiced precision. Sergeant Kyungmin worked her magic on the station's systems. Lights went out in some sections. Doors locked in others. The station's internal communications network collapsed. Kresh soldiers found themselves isolated, unable to coordinate or call for help. The assault team moved like shadows through smoke. They cleared rooms in seconds, using non-lethal force whenever possible. Stun grenades incapacitated groups of Kresh without killing them. Kinetic rounds targeted limbs instead of vital organs. The humans demonstrated a level of controlled violence that the Kresh had never encountered. 6 minutes after breaching the hull, Commander Tajan reached the cargo hold where the children were kept. 6 Kresh soldiers guarded them, weapons ready. The children sat huddled together in the center of the room. Minho saw the armored humans first, and his face lit up with hope. Tajan stepped into the room, weapon raised. "Stand down," he said in translated Kresh. "This is your only warning." One of the Kresh soldiers raised his weapon toward Minho. It was a mistake. He didn't even have time to fire. Tajan moved with the speed of long training and longer experience. 11 seconds later, all 6 Kresh guards were unconscious on the floor. The children were unharmed. Doyen stood up slowly, helping the younger children to their feet. He looked at the armored soldiers with tears streaming down his face. "We knew you'd come," he said. "We told everyone. We said humans don't leave their children behind." Commander Tajan knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with the boy. "You were right," he said simply. "Let's go home." The assault team moved through the mining station like a well-oiled machine. Commander Tajan led the way with the 12 children surrounded by his soldiers in a protective formation. Soman held onto a soldier's hand, her earlier tears replaced by determination. Minho walked with his head high, trying to be brave. The younger children stayed close together, following Doyen's calm instructions. Behind them, the station descended into chaos. Kresh soldiers rushed toward the cargo hold where the children had been kept, only to find themselves cut off by locked doors and deactivated elevators. Sergeant Kyungmin had turned the station's own systems against its occupants. Every corridor the humans needed was lit and open. Every path the Kresh tried to use was blocked and dark. "Status report." Captain Jiho's voice came through Tajan's helmet communicator. "Children secured," Tajan replied. "All 12 confirmed safe and mobile. Moving to extraction point now. Resistance is minimal. The Kresh weren't prepared for this, that was an understatement. The Kresh Collective had expected the slow diplomatic response typical of galactic civilizations. They'd anticipated weeks of negotiations, carefully orchestrated prisoner exchanges and political maneuvering. They never imagined that a species would respond to hostage-taking with overwhelming military force within days. The mining station had 800 Kresh occupants, but only 47 were actually soldiers. The rest were technicians, engineers, and support staff. The soldiers were equipped for ship-to-ship combat or defending against other spacecraft. They had energy weapons designed to punch through hull plating and kinetic cannons, meant for long-range engagements. They had nothing that could stop humans in close quarters. Combat inside the station itself. Group of 5 Kresh soldiers appeared at the end of a corridor, blocking the path to the extraction point. They raised their weapons, mandibles clicking in what might have been commands to halt. One fired an energy pulse that would have melted through a ship's armor plate. The pulse hit one of Taijin's soldiers directly in the chest. The soldier staggered back half a step, then kept moving forward. The kinetic barrier suit had absorbed the energy, spreading it across the entire surface. Within seconds, the suit's cooling systems dissipated the heat. The humans returned fire with precision shots that shattered the Kresh soldiers' weapons without killing them. Flashbang grenades detonated in the confined space, and when the light faded, all 5 Kresh were unconscious on the floor. The assault team stepped over them and continued moving. "They're trying to seal the hangar bay," Sergeant Kyungmin reported from her position with the fleet. She'd hardwired herself into the station's systems from one of the assault shuttles, giving her unprecedented access. "Rerouting controls now. Hangar doors will stay open." Thexval's voice suddenly broadcast throughout the station on every available speaker. "Humans, you violate every law of civilized space. You attack without declaration. You invade sovereign territory. The Galactic Council will punish this aggression. Surrender now and we will negotiate." Taijin cut into the broadcast with his own transmission. "Your negotiations ended when you threatened children. We're taking them home. Stand down and nobody else gets hurt. You cannot watch us." The assault team reached the hangar bay to find 20 Kresh soldiers assembled in defensive positions. They'd had time to set up barricades and establish overlapping fields of fire. It was the most organized resistance the humans had encountered. For a brief moment, the two groups faced each other across the expanse of the hangar. Then Sergeant Kyungmin activated the hangar's emergency decompression alarm. The piercing sound disoriented the Kresh soldiers just enough. In that moment of confusion, Taijin's team deployed smoke grenades that filled the hangar with thick, obscuring clouds. The humans saw perfectly through it using infrared and motion tracking in their helmets. The Kresh were effectively blind. The fight lasted 30 seconds. When the smoke cleared, 20 Kresh soldiers lay incapacitated but alive. The humans had targeted joints in their exoskeletons, pressure points in their nervous systems, anything that would stop them without permanent injury. It was surgical violence, controlled and precise. "Move," Taijin ordered, and his team hustled the children toward the waiting shuttle. On the Indomitable's bridge, Captain Jiho watched tactical displays showing the progress of the extraction. The entire operation had taken 23 minutes from hull breach to children recovered. The other 3 assault teams had secured key positions throughout the station, preventing any coordinated Kresh response. "Sir, we're receiving multiple communications from the station," the communications officer reported. "The Kresh are demanding we withdraw. They're threatening to detonate their power core and destroy the entire station." "Can they do that?" Jiho asked. Lieutenant Jiwan checked her sensors. "Their power core is old but stable. It would take them at least 10 minutes to override the safety systems. Commander Taijin will have the children off the station in 3. Then we wait." Dr. Heron stood nearby, watching the tactical displays with barely controlled tension. "What about the other Kresh on the station? The non-combatants? What about them?" Jiho asked. "If they destroy the power core, hundreds will die." "They won't destroy it. It's a bluff." Jiho pulled up a psychological profile of Thexval. "He's a tactician, not a fanatic. He won't kill his own people just to spite us." Hyerin looked uncertain, but she didn't argue further. On the displays, the shuttle carrying the children lifted off from the hangar bay and accelerated toward the Indomitable. Behind it, the 3 other assault shuttles followed, having completed their missions. Thexval appeared on the main communication screen, his insectoid features sharp with frustration and anger. "You have committed an act of war, Captain Jiho. The Galactic Council will not tolerate this aggression." "Tell it to someone who cares," Jiho replied. "Your hostages are now under our protection. You're lucky we didn't level this entire station. You violated every rule of civilized conduct. You ignored diplomatic protocols. You rejected negotiation in favor of violence. This is barbarism." "No," Jiho said quietly. "This is what happens when you threaten our children. Did you really think we'd wait weeks while you played political games? Did you think we'd sacrifice even one of them for the sake of your demands?" Thexval's mandibles clicked in agitation. "The other species negotiate. They understand the necessity of compromise. The other species are willing to accept casualties as part of their calculations. Humans aren't. You should have researched us better before you took our cubs." The shuttle docked with the Indomitable and the children were brought aboard. Medical teams immediately checked them over, while the assault team secured their equipment. Commander Taijin removed his helmet and was immediately surrounded by the children, who peppered him with questions and thanks. Captain Jiho arrived in the medical bay, just as the doctors confirmed all 12 children were healthy if shaken. Minho saw him first and ran over, launching into an excited description of the rescue operation. Selman joined in, her earlier fear replaced by pride in the soldiers who'd saved them. The other children clustered around, each adding their own details. Doyen approached Jiho more quietly. The 10-year-old boy seemed older now, marked by his experience. "Thank you for coming for us," he said seriously. "The creche said nobody would come. They said the galaxy doesn't work that way. They said we'd be here for months while people argued about us." "They were wrong," Jiho replied simply. "Because we're human? Because you're children and we don't leave our children behind. Not ever." Back in space, the human fleet maintained position around the mining station. The creche inside were confused and demoralized. They'd lost the hostages, failed to stop the assault, and accomplished nothing except earning humanity's focused attention. Thexval sent increasingly desperate messages to the Galactic Council, demanding they intervene and force the humans to withdraw. The Council's response was slow and measured, exactly what the creche had come to expect from galactic civilization. They formed committees. They debated jurisdiction. They discussed the legal implications of human actions versus creche actions. While they talked, the human fleet systematically took control of the entire mining station. Teams of human marines boarded and secured every section. They detained all creche military personnel and separated them from the non-combatants. They seized computer systems and copied every piece of intelligence about creche operations in the Outer Rim. They cataloged weapons, mapped supply networks, and identified every member of the creche collective's leadership. The operation took 6 hours. When it was complete, Captain Jiho sent a single message to Thexval. "Your hostage crisis is over. Your military operations in this sector are over. Your organization is now fully exposed to Galactic Council oversight. If you're very lucky, they'll prosecute you according to their laws instead of ours." Thexval's response was bitter. "You've made an enemy of the creche collective. You made an enemy of humanity when you took our children. We're just showing you the consequences." The human fleet prepared to depart, leaving behind a contingent of Marines to hold the station until Council peacekeepers arrived. As they withdrew, they transmitted all the intelligence they'd gathered to the Council. Information about creche military strength, their base locations, their supply lines, everything. It was a message to the galaxy. Humanity could show restraint when treated with respect, but threaten their children, and they would demonstrate capabilities that the older species had forgotten were possible. On the journey back to Council space, Dr. Hyeron found Captain Jiho in his quarters. He was writing reports, documenting every decision and action for the inevitable inquiries that would follow. "We're going to face serious consequences for this," Hyeron said. "The Council is already drafting sanctions. Some species want us expelled from the galactic community entirely." "I know. Was it worth it?" Jiho thought about 12 children playing in the ship's recreation area, their laughter echoing through the corridors. He thought about Minho showing his rescuers pictures he'd drawn. He thought about Somin planning her next adventure. He thought about Doyen, who'd kept the other children calm even when he was terrified. "Yes," he said simply. "It was worth it." Hyeron nodded slowly. She'd opposed the military action initially, preferring diplomatic solutions. But seeing the children safe, watching them reconnect with their families via video calls, she understood why Jiho had made the choices he did. "The galaxy thinks we're dangerous now," she observed. "Good," Jiho replied. "Maybe they'll think twice before threatening humans again." The fleet continued toward Council space, carrying 12 children who would grow up knowing that their species valued them more than politics, more than diplomatic relations, more than anything the galaxy considered important. They'd learned that when humans said no one gets left behind, it wasn't just a phrase. It was a promise written in action, and the galaxy had just learned the same lesson. The return journey to Galactic Council space took 3 days. During that time, the galaxy erupted into chaos. News of humanity's military action spread through every communication network. Some species condemned the humans for their violation of diplomatic norms. Others expressed quiet admiration for the speed and efficiency of the rescue. A few seemed genuinely shocked that any civilization would respond so aggressively to a hostage situation. Captain Jiho spent most of the journey preparing for the inevitable confrontations ahead. He knew the Council would demand explanations. He knew there would be calls for sanctions, possibly even expulsion from the galactic community. But when he walked through the ship and saw the 12 children safe and healthy, laughing with the crew members who'd rescued them, he felt no regrets. Dr. Hyeron coordinated with Earth officials, helping them prepare for the political fallout. Messages poured in from human colonies throughout space, expressing support for the military action. Public opinion on Earth was overwhelmingly positive. Parents watched news footage of the children being rescued and felt nothing but pride in their species' response. But the Galactic Council saw things differently. When the human fleet arrived at the Council station, they found themselves immediately surrounded by ships from a dozen different species. Ambassador Quillnath transmitted a formal summons for Captain Jiho to appear before an emergency tribunal. The message was cold and official, listing violations of Council law that read like a prosecutor's opening argument. Jiho transferred the UEDA children to a secure transport that would take them directly to their families. He watched them leave with mixed emotions. They were safe now, but the consequences of saving them were just beginning. "Ready?" Commander Tajin asked, falling into step beside him. "No," Jiho admitted, "but let's go anyway." The tribunal chamber was smaller than the main council hall, but no less imposing. 7 species sat in judgment representing the council's leadership. Ambassador Quillnath presided, his golden eyes fixed on Jiho as the human captain entered and stood in the center of the chamber. "Captain Jiho," Quillnath began formally, "you stand accused of multiple violations of Galactic Council law. You conducted military operations without Council authorization. You entered restricted space without permission. You assaulted a civilian station and detained hundreds of beings without legal cause. You ignored all diplomatic protocols and rejected Council authority. How do you plead to these charges?" Jiho looked up at the assembled ambassadors. "I don't plead anything. I did what was necessary to save human children from hostage takers. I'd do it again." A murmur of shock ran through the chamber. The Council expected contrition, explanations, perhaps appeals for understanding. They didn't expect defiance. "You don't deny your actions?" asked the Thorian representative. "Why would I deny them? I'm proud of them. In 72 hours, we located the hostages, mounted a successful rescue operation, and brought every child home alive. Your standard protocols would have taken weeks and resulted in casualties. We did better. You violated our laws." Quillnath's scales rippled with anger. "You disrupted galactic stability. You set a dangerous precedent. If every species responded to hostage situations with military force, we'd have constant warfare. Then maybe species should stop taking hostages," Jiho replied calmly. "You call our actions dangerous. I call your willingness to accept casualties dangerous. You were prepared to sacrifice 1 or 2 children because your model said that was acceptable. We weren't." The Nexian ambassador leaned forward. "The Council has maintained peace for thousands of years using diplomatic methods. Who are you, a species barely 20 years in space, to reject our accumulated wisdom?" "Your wisdom requires sacrifices," Jiho said. "It requires people to accept that some lives are worth less than political stability. It requires parents to understand that their children are acceptable losses. That's not wisdom. That's cowardice dressed up in diplomatic language." The chamber erupted in outrage. Multiple ambassadors began speaking at once, their translators creating a cacophony of protest. Only Quillnath remained calm, raising one clawed hand for silence. "You understand the consequences of your words?" The Velrosian ambassador asked quietly. "The Council could expel humanity. We could cut you off from galactic trade networks, technology exchanges, and diplomatic relations. Earth would be isolated, alone in the universe." "Then we'll be alone," Jiho replied. "But our children will be safe, and will sleep at night knowing we didn't abandon them for politics." For a long moment, silence filled the chamber. The ambassadors looked at each other, clearly uncertain how to proceed. They'd dealt with many species over millennia, but never one quite like humanity. Most civilizations grew more cautious and diplomatic as they matured. Humans seemed to be going in the opposite direction. The Corvan ambassador, representing one of the younger council species, spoke up unexpectedly. "May I ask Captain GHO a question?" Quillnath nodded permission. "If another species' children were taken hostage," the Corvan asked, "would humanity respond the same way?" GHO considered the question carefully. "That would depend on the species and the circumstances. But if someone asked for our help in rescuing children, yes, we'd probably help. Because children are children, regardless of species. Even if it meant violating council law? Especially if it meant violating council law." The Corvan ambassador sat back, a gesture that might have indicated satisfaction. Around the chamber, other ambassadors whispered among themselves. The tribunal recessed for 2 hours while they debated humanity's fate. During the recess, Dr. Hyerin found GHO in a waiting area. "You're not making this easy," she said. "They wanted you to apologize, show remorse, promise to follow their rules in the future." "I won't lie to them," GHO replied. "Next time someone threatens human children, I'll do exactly what I did this time. They need to understand that. They're talking about expulsion. Let them talk." But when the tribunal reconvened, the decision surprised everyone. Quillnath stood and addressed the chamber, his voice carrying the weight of authority accumulated over a long career. "The Council has reached a decision regarding humanity's actions," he announced. "We find that Captain GHO and the human military did indeed violate multiple Council laws and protocols. However, we also acknowledge that the Kresh Collective's actions were criminal and that the Council's own response was insufficient. Therefore, we impose the following judgment." He paused, looking directly at GHO. "Humanity will be formally censured for their violations. Captain GHO will be prohibited from serving in any diplomatic capacity for a period of 2 years. Earth will pay reparations to the Kresh Collective for damages to the mining station. However, humanity will not be expelled from the Council, and no further sanctions will be imposed." It was a slap on the wrist, almost insultingly lenient given the severity of the initial charges. GHO understood immediately what had happened. The Council couldn't condone humanity's actions, but they also couldn't be seen as punishing a species for successfully rescuing children. Public opinion across the galaxy, especially among younger species, had shifted in humanity's favor. Furthermore, Quillnath continued, the Council will review its protocols for hostage situations and crisis response. Clearly, our current methods are not universally acceptable. We must adapt to accommodate different cultural values regarding individual life and collective safety. After the tribunal adjourned, GHO found himself surrounded by representatives from other species. Most were younger civilizations, those who'd joined the Council within the last few centuries. They had questions about human military training, crisis response protocols, and decision-making processes. "How do you mobilize so quickly?" asked the Corvan representative. "We practice," GHO replied. "Every human colony has emergency protocols. Every military unit trains for rapid deployment. We don't wait for committees to decide what to do. We act and we deal with consequences later." "But doesn't that lead to mistakes?" "Sometimes. But we'd rather act quickly and correct mistakes than wait so long that action becomes meaningless." Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened throughout the galaxy. Hostage-taking incidents dropped dramatically. Fringe groups that might have considered such tactics reconsidered when they learned about humanity's response. The phrase "don't touch the human cubs" entered galactic slang, often used humorously but carrying a serious undertone. The Kresh Collective issued a formal apology and opened genuine negotiations with the Galactic Council. With their leadership exposed and their military capabilities revealed, they had little choice. Thexval was tried and convicted of multiple crimes, sentenced to 30 years in a council prison facility. Captain GHO returned to Earth as a controversial figure. The council had censured him, but humanity treated him as a hero. He gave speeches at military academies, teaching the next generation about the importance of protecting the innocent. He wrote reports about galactic politics and how humanity needed to maintain its unique perspective, even while working with older civilizations. 1 month after the rescue, Jiho visited the Luna base where the children had been reunited with their families. The base commander had organized a small ceremony to thank the rescue team. Commander Taijun and his soldiers stood uncomfortably, while children and parents expressed their gratitude. Minho found Jiho after the ceremony, carrying a drawing he'd made. It showed the rescue operation in crayon and marker, with Taijun's team depicted as heroic figures bursting through walls to save them. The proportions were wrong and the colors were wild, but the emotion was genuine. "My dad says some people are angry at you," Minho said, looking up at the captain. Jiho knelt down to the boy's level. "That's true. I broke some rules to rescue you. Some people think I was wrong to do that. But we're safe because of you." "That's right." Sumin joined them, followed by several other children. "Commander Taijun said humans don't leave people behind," she said. "He said it's like a promise." "Is that really true?" Jiho looked at the group of children, thinking about everything that had happened. He thought about the fleet that had mobilized in hours. He thought about the soldiers who'd risked their lives in the rescue. He thought about every human who'd supported the operation, even knowing it might cost Earth its place in the galactic community. "Yes," he said simply. "That's really true. It's not just something we say. It's who we are." Doyen, who'd been quiet during the ceremony, spoke up. "Will you do it again, if other kids need help?" "Yes," Jiho replied without hesitation. "We will." The children seemed satisfied with that answer. They ran off to play, their laughter echoing through the base corridors. They'd survived a terrifying ordeal, but they'd emerged with absolute confidence that their species would protect them. That confidence would shape them as they grew, making them bolder and more trusting than they might otherwise have been. Dr. Hyerin found Jiho as he was preparing to leave the base. "I've been analyzing the galactic response," she said. "Something interesting is happening. 17 species have reached out to Earth privately. They're asking about our military training methods, our crisis response systems, our decision-making protocols. Some are even proposing joint operations for rescue missions. The Council won't like that. The Council is adapting whether they like it or not. We forced them to confront an uncomfortable truth. Their methods prioritize stability over individual lives. Not every species agrees with that trade-off anymore." Jiho considered that. Humanity had been in space for only 20 years, still considered children by galactic standards. But maybe being young meant something valuable. Maybe they remembered things the older species had forgotten about: urgency, protection, and the value of individual lives. "What about us?" Jiho asked. "Did this change how the galaxy sees humanity?" "Definitely," Hyerin replied. "Some species think we're dangerous. Others think we're naive. But everyone knows now that we mean what we say. When we make promises, we keep them. When we say we'll protect our own, we do it. The galaxy may not always like us, but they respect us now." That evening, Jiho received a message from Commander Taijun. The Special Forces team was being deployed again to a human research station on the frontier that had sent a distress call. Pirates had attacked, and there were researchers trapped inside the damaged facility. The message ended with 5 words that had become the unofficial motto of humanity's military: "No one gets left behind." Jiho smiled. The galaxy had learned its lesson about threatening humans. Now they were learning another lesson: that humanity's protective instincts extended beyond their own species. Give them a worthy cause and humans would fight for it regardless of cost or consequence. He sent back a brief reply: "Bring them home safe." The Galactic Council had tried to teach humanity patience and diplomatic restraint. Instead, humanity had taught the galaxy about the power of immediate action and absolute commitment, about the value of individual lives over political convenience, about the strength that came from keeping promises, even when breaking them would be easier. The children who'd been rescued would grow up and tell their own children about the day humanity demonstrated what it meant to never leave anyone behind. Those children would tell their children, and the story would become legend. A reminder that some species don't negotiate when their young are threatened. A warning that some promises once made will be kept no matter the cost. And throughout the galaxy, in 100 different languages on 1,000 different worlds, beings would remember the phrase that had entered galactic consciousness: "Don't touch the human cubs." Because the galaxy had learned what happened when you did. And they wouldn't forget.